The first time Micah Ellison realized the man he loved might never have loved him at all, he was standing 12 feet from Bennett Rourke with a birthday gift pressed against his chest and $37 left in his checking account. He had spent 24 of those dollars framing the drawing inside the box. Stupid, probably. Bennett could buy original paintings without checking the price tag. He could rent this entire glass-walled penthouse for a Tuesday and forget he'd done it by Wednesday. But Micah had spent 6 nights drawing the little 24-hour diner where they'd had their first real conversation, because Bennett once told him that night was the first time in years he'd forgotten people were watching him. Micah had believed that mattered. He had believed he mattered. Then laughter spilled through the half-open lounge door beside him. A whole year, someone said. I can't believe you actually kept the bet going this long. Micah stopped breathing. The party continued behind him, bright and expensive and oblivious. Someone popped champagne. Music rolled beneath the conversation. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered like somebody had scattered diamonds across black velvet. Micah stared at the narrow opening between the lounge doors. He should walk away. He knew that. He was 25, not 15. He had deadlines, clients, rent due Monday, and enough self-respect to understand when a room wasn't meant for him. He'd spent most of the evening understanding exactly that. Bennett's friends wore watches worth more than Micah made in a year. They talked about ski houses and private clubs as casually as Micah talked about subway delays. He had smiled anyway, because Bennett had kept finding him in the crowd. That was Bennett's strange talent. He could have 100 people competing for his attention and somehow make Micah feel like the only person there. Earlier, when Micah had quietly considered leaving, Bennett had appeared beside him without being called. He hadn't asked what was wrong. He'd simply taken Micah's untouched champagne, replaced it with sparkling water, and murmured, "You hate champagne. I tolerate champagne. You make the same face drinking it that you make when your laptop updates without permission." Micah had laughed despite himself. Bennett had squeezed his shoulder once. "Stay until midnight. Then we're escaping. Your own birthday? Especially my own birthday. Diner. Fries. That terrible chocolate cake you pretend isn't terrible. It is terrible. You ate half of mine last time." Evidence is circumstantial. Bennett had smiled then, not the polished Rourke smile from magazine photographs, but the smaller one Micah thought belonged only to him. One more hour. That was all it took. Micah stayed, because for 1 year, Bennett had noticed things. He noticed when Micah skipped lunch during deadlines. He sat on Micah's battered couch while Micah rebuilt his illustration portfolio and never once suggested calling somebody influential. He remembered Micah hated lilies, loved thunderstorms, and got quiet when he was worried about money. Bennett had once crossed half the city because Micah casually texted that a client had rejected 3 weeks of work. He arrived carrying coffee and said, "Show me what they were too stupid to understand." Nobody had ever believed in Micah's work like that. Nobody had ever made him feel so thoroughly chosen. And being chosen mattered more than Micah liked admitting. He had spent years becoming good at needing very little from anyone. Bennett had made him risk needing something enormous. A future. Now, behind the lounge door, a second voice laughed. "Come on. You thought he'd last 3 weeks." Micah's fingers tightened around the gift. "I thought Bennett would get bored. Apparently our golden boy hates losing." Someone tapped a glass. "Speaking of losing, what's the time?" 11:53. Another laugh. 7 minutes, Rourke. Micah's stomach dropped. Bennett was in there. He hadn't heard Bennett speak yet, but they were talking to him. About Micah. "Remind me," someone continued. "Original bet was get Ellison to date you, then keep him until your birthday? That was phase 1, right? The bonus." Micah couldn't move. He says, "I love you" in front of us before midnight. Bennett takes the whole pot. The room erupted. Micah looked down at the gift he'd made with hands Bennett had kissed after long nights of drawing. Suddenly, every memory seemed to split into 2 versions. The one he'd lived and another hidden underneath it. Their first coffee. First date. The rainy Sunday Bennett helped him carry canvases 3 blocks because no cab would stop. Christmas morning. The night Micah finally whispered "I love you" against Bennett's shoulder and felt Bennett hold him tighter. Bennett had never said it back in front of his friends. Micah had thought he was private. Now someone inside called, 6 minutes. "Go bring your boyfriend in here and make him say it." A chair scraped. Micah stepped backward. The framed drawing slipped inside its wrapping, and he caught it against his chest before it fell. His heart was beating so hard it hurt. Then the lounge door opened. Bennett stood there. For once, the most socially effortless man Micah had ever known had no smile ready. His face went completely still when he saw Micah. His eyes dropped to the gift, then to Micah's white-knuckled grip around it, then toward the open door behind him. He understood. Immediately. Micah. One word. Barely audible. Behind Bennett, somebody chuckled. Well, perfect timing. Bennett turned so sharply the laughter died. He reached back and pulled the lounge door shut in his friends' faces. Then he stepped toward Micah. Micah stepped back. Bennett stopped instantly. That hurt almost worse. Because he noticed. Of course he noticed. Tell me, Micah said. His voice sounded frighteningly calm. Tell you what. Don't. Bennett swallowed. Micah had known this man for a year. He knew every version of his silence. Amused silence. Angry silence. Tired silence. This was new. This was fear. Was I a bet? Micah asked. Bennett's face changed. And in that tiny collapse of certainty, Micah got his answer before Bennett ever opened his mouth. The party began counting down somewhere behind them. 10, 9, 8. Bennett took one careful step forward. Micah, please. What happened at the beginning and what this became are not the same thing. 7, 6. Micah stared at him. There it was. Not denial. Not outrage. Not confusion. So it's true. 5. Bennett looked like he wanted to reach for him and knew he no longer had the right. At the beginning, he said quietly, yes. 4. Something inside Micah went strangely silent. 3. He had entered this hallway afraid he didn't belong in Bennett's world. 2. Now he understood the more terrible possibility. Maybe he'd only been invited into it because somebody thought watching him fall in love would be entertaining. 1. Cheers exploded through the penthouse. Midnight. Bennett's 27th birthday. Micah slowly held out the present. Bennett stared at it, but didn't take it. I made this for you, Micah said. Because I thought tonight meant something. It does. To me, it did. Bennett flinched. Micah lowered the box instead of giving it to him. For the first time that night, he didn't feel poor. He didn't feel invisible. He didn't even feel embarrassed. He felt furious, and beneath the fury was something steadier. The realization that Bennett's money, popularity, and beautiful promises did not entitle him to one more second of Micah's trust. Micah turned toward the elevator. Wait. Bennett's voice cracked behind him. Micah stopped but didn't turn around. There is something else you need to know, Bennett said. About the bet. About tonight. Micah closed his eyes. He had already learned that their first date had been a wager and his love had been somebody's finish line. He couldn't imagine what could possibly be crueler. Then the lounge door opened behind Bennett, and a man's amused voice said, You might want to tell him the part that hasn't happened yet. Micah turned slowly. Grant Keller stood in the lounge doorway with a champagne glass in one hand and the careless smile of someone who had never expected consequences to enter the room. Bennett moved before Micah could speak. He stepped directly between them and pulled the door closed again. Leave. Grant laughed. It is my fault he hurt us. Bennett opened the door just enough to look at him. Get out of my apartment. The amusement disappeared from Grant's face. Bennett. Now. Micah had watched Bennett command rooms before. He had seen investors twice his age stop talking when Bennett spoke, and restaurant managers somehow find tables that had not existed 30 seconds earlier. But Bennett had always worn his influence lightly around Micah, almost as if he knew how uncomfortable it made him. Tonight, there was nothing light about it. Bennett took out his phone, called the building manager, and said, The private party is over. Please have security escort my guests downstairs. Then he ended the call while Grant was still protesting. Within minutes, the music stopped. Confused guests collected coats. Bennett's birthday celebration dissolved around him, and Bennett never once tried to stop it. Micah hated that some wounded part of him noticed. You do not get points for throwing out your friends, he said. I know. You do not get points for admitting it after I caught you. I know. Stop saying that. Bennett's jaw tightened. Then tell me what I am allowed to say. The truth. That landed. Bennett looked toward the windows, where the city glittered beneath them. A year ago, Grant said you were the only person at that charity exhibit who did not care who I was. I said that was ridiculous. He bet me I could not get you to go out with me. Micah almost laughed. It came out as a breath. And your response was what? Challenge accepted. Bennett did not defend himself. Yes. The honesty was brutal. Micah stared at him. remembering that first night with painful clarity. He had been working temporary event staff while trying to get his illustration career moving. Bennett had approached the service corridor carrying 2 plates of untouched food. Micah had assumed the rich stranger wanted directions. Instead, Bennett had handed him 1 plate and said, "You have been working for 6 hours and pretending crackers count as dinner." Micah had nearly refused on principle. Bennett had sat on an equipment case in a suit that probably cost more than Micah's rent and eaten with him anyway. That had been the first crack in Micah's defenses. Not the money, not the face. The fact that Bennett had noticed he was hungry. Was that part of it? Micah asked. Bennett understood immediately. The food. You sitting with me. A pause. I approached you because of the bet. Micah looked away. But I brought the food because I watched you give your dinner break to another server whose kid was sick. Nobody else noticed. Micah's eyes snapped back to him. Bennett continued quietly. You helped her finish her section so she could leave early. Then you lied to the supervisor and said you were not hungry because you knew she felt guilty. Micah had forgotten that. Bennett had not. That does not make what I did better, Bennett said. No. But you asked what was real. For one dangerous second, Micah remembered why trusting Bennett had once felt so easy. Then he remembered the laughter. What was the cruelest part? Bennett went still. Micah pointed toward the lounge. Grant said something had not happened yet. Bennett rubbed a hand over his face. The original bet was that I could get you to date me. Grant kept changing the terms because he thought I was dragging it out. Changing them how? 3 months became 6. 6 became a year. Then he added the birthday condition. Micah's stomach tightened. Me saying I love you. In front of them before midnight. Bennett's voice dropped. If you did, the money was mine. Micah suddenly understood every party Bennett had rescued him from before he could become emotional. Every time Bennett had redirected the conversation when someone teased them about commitment. What Micah had mistaken for privacy might have been Bennett keeping the finish line out of reach. How much? Micah, how much was my heart worth? Bennett looked sick. $50,000. Silence swallowed the penthouse. Micah had worried that morning about whether his freelance payment would arrive before rent. $50,000 was not abstract to him. It was years of breathing room. To Bennett's friends, apparently, it was entertainment. Micah removed the silver watch Bennett had given him for their anniversary and placed it on the marble console. This was probably nothing to you. Bennett did not touch it. It was not part of the bet. That is the problem. Micah's voice finally shook. I do not know what was. He headed for the elevator. Bennett followed 2 steps, then stopped himself. I can drive you home. No. I can have a car take you. You do not have to see me. Bennett. It is after midnight. You are upset. I just want to know you get home safely. Micah looked at him. There it was again, the thing that made this unbearable. Bennett was not demanding forgiveness. He was noticing. Helping. Exactly as he had from the beginning. Micah pressed the elevator button. I will get myself home. Bennett nodded. He did not argue. When the doors opened, Micah stepped inside. Bennett remained several feet away. I am not going to come after you tonight, he said. I am not going to send flowers or stand outside your apartment until you talk to me. You asked for truth, and you deserve time to decide what you want to do with it. Micah held his gaze. For once, let me be the one who decides. Something in Bennett's expression broke. You are. The doors began closing. Micah. He almost ignored him. What? Bennett stood alone in the enormous apartment, surrounded by abandoned glasses and the remains of a birthday he had ended himself. I loved you before tonight, he said. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I did. The elevator doors closed between them. Micah stared at his reflection in the polished metal as the numbers descended. He was still furious, still humiliated, still holding the birthday present he had never given. But beneath all of it was a new and deeply inconvenient question. Bennett had admitted the bet when lying would have been easier. He had thrown everyone out rather than let them laugh at Micah again. And he had remembered a small act of kindness from the night they met that Micah himself had forgotten. None of that erased what Bennett had done. It only made one question impossible to escape. If Bennett had started by pretending to care, when exactly had he stopped pretending? By Monday morning, Micah had learned that heartbreak could make ordinary objects feel like evidence. Bennett's coffee mug sat beside the sink. His charcoal scarf still hung from the hook by the door. On Micah's desk, beneath 3 unpaid invoices and a stack of rejected sketches, lay the portfolio Bennett had helped him. Rebuild 6 months earlier. Micah almost shoved everything into a box. Instead, his phone rang. Micah Ellison, a woman asked. This is Lauren from Northline Gallery. We need to discuss Thursday's portfolio review. His stomach tightened. Northline was not famous, but it was respected, and getting that meeting had taken 4 months of emails. Of course. A pause. We have received some information that creates a concern about professional boundaries. Micah went cold. By noon, he knew why. Someone from Bennett's circle had posted about the birthday wager in a private social group, and screenshots were spreading. The story had mutated quickly. Micah was no longer an illustrator who had unknowingly been used in a bet. He was a struggling boyfriend who had supposedly dated Bennett for access to money and connections. Thursday's review was not canceled, Lauren explained, but several donors would be present. They wanted clarity. Micah sat at his kitchen table after the call, staring at his portfolio. For one humiliating minute, he considered withdrawing. Then anger replaced shame. He had spent years learning composition, color, light, anatomy, and the strange discipline of turning an emotion into something another person could see. Bennett had not drawn a single line for him. Micah opened his laptop and sent Northline a message. Please judge my work. If it is not good enough, reject it for that. He attached timestamps, invoices, and earlier portfolio submissions showing that his work existed long before Bennett entered his life. Then he went to the review. The gallery occupied a converted warehouse in Chelsea, all white brick and polished concrete. Micah arrived in the best jacket he owned and immediately recognized 3 men from Bennett's birthday party near the wine table. One whispered something. Another looked Micah up and down with the kind of smile that made his skin crawl. Micah kept walking. Lauren met him beside a wall displaying his sample prints. Your documentation was helpful, she said. But one donor still has concerns about how you obtained this opportunity. Before Micah could answer, a familiar voice behind him said, he obtained it by submitting his portfolio 3 times. Bennett. Micah turned. Bennett stood several feet away in a dark suit, looking exhausted and completely out of place in the quiet gallery despite being the richest person in it. He did not approach Micah. He addressed Lauren instead. For the record, I did not contact Northline on Micah's behalf. I did not fund his submission. I did not introduce him to anyone here. One of the men by the wine table laughed softly. That is convenient. Bennett looked at him. The man's smile vanished. Bennett took an envelope from inside his coat and handed it to Lauren. My attorney prepared a signed statement. It confirms that Micah had no knowledge of the wager and received no professional benefit from it. If anyone wants to attach a Rourke name to what happened, attach mine. Micah stared at him. Bennett could have made one phone call and frightened everyone into silence. Instead, he had done the one thing Micah needed most. He had separated Micah's work from Bennett's power. Lauren glanced through the document, then looked toward Micah's illustrations. Actually, there is something I wanted to ask you about. She stopped in front of a cityscape Micah had painted in deep blue and amber. Why is every window different? Micah blinked. Then he forgot Bennett was standing there. Because apartment buildings look repetitive from far away, but nobody living inside them thinks their life is repetitive. I wanted every window to suggest somebody had just left, just arrived, or was waiting for someone. Lauren studied it again. That is why it works. Bennett said nothing. But when Micah glanced toward him, the expression on his face was unmistakable. Pride. Not possession. Not relief that his boyfriend had performed well. Pride in Micah. Lauren moved to the next piece, and the conversation became about line weight, visual storytelling, and whether Micah could prepare 6 finished works for a group showcase. 20 minutes later, she offered him a place. Micah walked outside afterward with his heart still racing. Bennett was waiting across the sidewalk, but he did not come closer until Micah nodded. You knew about the review? Micah asked. I knew somebody was trying to damage it. Grant. Bennett's silence answered enough. You could have called the gallery. I almost did. Bennett gave a tired half-smile. Then I remembered what you told me the first night we met. You did not want me buying the privilege of being in your life. Micah looked down at the envelope copy Bennett still held. So you gave them evidence instead. I gave them responsibility. Your work did the rest. That was different. Painfully different. Micah had spent 3 days wondering whether Bennett had ever truly seen him beyond the challenge of winning him. Inside that gallery, Bennett had been offered the easiest possible role, powerful rich man rescuing his embarrassed boyfriend. He had refused it. He had stepped aside and made everyone look at Micah instead. They offered me the showcase, Micah said. Bennett's face changed instantly. The exhaustion disappeared beneath a smile so open that Micah remembered, against his will, loving it. Of course they did. Do not say of course. Why? Because I was terrified. Bennett softened. Then you were terrified and did it anyway. Micah had no defense against that. His phone buzzed. A message from Lauren confirmed the showcase date. Almost simultaneously, Bennett's phone lit up in his hand. Micah accidentally saw the preview before Bennett turned the screen over. Grant Keller, you already tried backing out months ago. Do not pretend you suddenly grew a conscience. Micah froze. Bennett noticed. What does that mean? Micah asked. Bennett looked at the face-down phone, then back at him. For the first time since the party, Micah saw something besides guilt in his expression. Resignation. It means there is something I should have shown you before you ever had to ask. Micah stared at Bennett's face-down phone. You tried to back out months ago? Bennett was quiet for a moment, then nodded. 3 months after our first date. Micah almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in him. And you thought maybe that detail could wait? No. I thought you deserved to see the whole conversation, not whatever version Grant decides to leak. Bennett unlocked his phone, but before he could open anything, Micah's own screen lit up with 6 notifications. Then 12. A screenshot had appeared online. It showed Micah leaving Northline beside Bennett, followed by a caption suggesting Bennett had purchased his way into the showcase. Micah felt the old humiliation return like cold water down his back. He is doing this because I went to the gallery. He is doing this because he is losing control of the story, Bennett said. His voice became colder, but when he looked at Micah, it softened immediately. And because he knows attacking me is boring. Attacking you gets attention. Micah shoved his phone into his pocket. I can handle Grant. I know. That answer stopped him. Bennett did not say he would fix it. He did not tell Micah to stay out of it. He simply opened the message thread and handed over his phone. But you should know what he is trying to keep hidden. Micah scrolled. The messages were dated 9 months earlier. Grant had joked about increasing the wager. Another friend asked whether Bennett was getting sentimental. Then Bennett's message appeared. Keep the money. I am done. Grant replied that nobody quit halfway through, followed by a laughing comment about Bennett falling for the art kid. Bennett had answered with 4 words. Do not call him that. Micah read it twice. There were more messages. Bennett refusing new conditions. Bennett telling Grant to stop asking about private details. Bennett finally leaving the group chat for nearly 2 weeks before returning after Grant promised to drop the subject. Micah handed the phone back. You could have told me then. Yes. Instead you protected me from the joke, while keeping me inside the lie. Bennett flinched. Yes. Before Micah could answer, Lauren stepped outside the gallery doors. 2 donors followed her, along with Grant himself. Grant wore the same effortless smile from the birthday party. Micah, Lauren said carefully. We have a problem. Grant lifted his phone. I was only explaining that Northline should know who is financing its newest discovery. Nobody is financing me, Micah said. Your boyfriend's attorney delivered paperwork this morning. Former boyfriend, Micah said. Automatically. Bennett's expression tightened, but he did not correct him. Grant smiled wider. Whatever we are calling it this week. Bennett stepped forward. Grant looked almost pleased, clearly expecting money, threats, or the Rourke name used like a weapon. Bennett gave him none of those. Lauren, he said, ask Micah when he first submitted to Northline. 4 months ago, she answered. Ask when your review committee first scored his portfolio. Lauren glanced at Micah. Before Christmas. Bennett nodded. Before I knew Northline was considering him. Grant scoffed. You expect everyone to believe that? Bennett looked at him with startling calm. No. I expect records to establish it. Then he turned toward the donors. If my presence creates doubt about Micah's work, remove my name from the equation. I will not donate to Northline, sponsor the showcase, purchase Micah's work through the gallery, or introduce him to collectors. Evaluate him exactly as you would have if I had never walked through that door. Micah stared. Bennett had just voluntarily surrendered every shortcut his influence could provide. Grant blinked. You are seriously doing this for him? Bennett's gaze went flat. I am doing this because he earned something, and you keep trying to make his achievement about me. Then Bennett did something Micah had never seen him do with anyone in his world. He stepped back. Not forward. Back. He left the center of the conversation to Micah. Lauren looked at the cityscape hanging behind the glass. Mr. Ellison, the committee selected your work before any of this became public. That has not changed. One donor nodded. Neither has my vote. Grant's smile finally disappeared. Micah felt something inside him loosen. He had defended himself. Bennett had defended the truth. Neither had needed to make Micah smaller to do it. Grant turned toward Bennett. Your father is going to love this. You are embarrassing yourself over someone who will probably never trust you again. Bennett's expression barely changed. That would be his right. Micah looked at him sharply. Grant seemed equally surprised. Bennett continued. Micah does not owe me forgiveness because I finally learned how to behave like a decent man. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Grant walked away, already typing on his phone. Bennett watched him go without following. He will make this worse, Micah said. Probably. And your family? They will survive being disappointed in me. There was dry humor in the answer, but something tired underneath it. Micah noticed for the first time how much Bennett's reputation had always functioned like a cage disguised as a crown. You really gave up the gallery connections. Bennett shrugged. You never needed them. You used to think everyone needed your connections. You have corrected me about many things. Against every reasonable instinct, Micah smiled. Just slightly. Bennett saw it and went completely still, as though Micah had handed him something fragile. He did not push. He only said, Congratulations again. Micah should have left. Instead, he glanced toward the coffee shop across the street. I have 20 minutes. Bennett's eyes lifted. For what? Coffee. And the messages. All of them. Hope crossed Bennett's face, immediate and almost painfully unguarded. Micah raised a warning finger. This is not forgiveness. I know. And you are paying because your coffee order is ridiculous. Bennett's mouth finally curved. That seems fair. They had barely reached the curb when Bennett's phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen, and the small warmth between them vanished. Micah did not need to ask who it was. Bennett turned the phone toward him. Grant had sent one sentence. If you are finally telling him everything, make sure you tell him why you came back to the group after you tried to quit. Micah looked from the message to Bennett. Bennett did not hide the screen. He did not make an excuse. He only said, that is the part one should have told you 9 months ago. The coffee shop was almost empty when Micah chose the smallest table in the farthest corner. Bennett sat across from him with his untouched espresso between both hands, looking less like the man who could empty a penthouse with one phone call and more like someone waiting for a verdict. Micah placed Bennett's phone between them. Why did you go back? Bennett looked at the message from Grant again. Because Grant threatened to tell you. Micah frowned. That makes no sense. I know. Bennett unlocked the old conversation and scrolled backward. The pattern was suddenly obvious. Bennett had tried to leave the group. Grant had mocked him. Bennett stayed gone. Then, 11 days later, Grant sent a photograph of Micah and Bennett leaving a movie theater together. Under it was one message. Come back, or Ellison learns how you met. Micah stared at the screen. He blackmailed you. Do not make that sound better than it was. Bennett's voice was quiet. He gave me a choice. Tell you the truth myself, or keep him quiet. I chose the cowardly option. Micah looked up. You went back because you were protecting the lie. Yes. Not me. Bennett swallowed. I told myself it was you. That is the part one I'm ashamed of. The answer hurt precisely because Bennett was no longer trying to polish it. He explained that by then the wager had stopped mattering to him. He had already refused the money. He had already stopped reporting anything about their dates. But Grant knew Bennett's weakness was no longer losing a bet. It was losing Micah. So Bennett returned to the group, smiled through dinners he hated, and let Grant believe he still had leverage. Every week Bennett intended to confess. Every week Micah trusted him a little more. Then Micah met Bennett's mother. Then they spent Thanksgiving together. Then Micah gave Bennett a key to his apartment. Each milestone made the truth harder to say and more necessary to say, and Bennett chose silence anyway. Micah leaned back. You had 9 months. I know. 9 months where I could have decided whether I wanted to stay. Yes. You decided for me. Bennett closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Micah hated how much easier anger would have been if Bennett argued. Why? Bennett looked toward the rain beginning to strike the window. Because the first few weeks, I thought I could tell you whenever I wanted. Then I started waiting for your messages. I started knowing which days you had client calls because you got quiet afterward. I started keeping crackers in my car because you forget to eat when you are nervous. His mouth tightened. Then one night you fell asleep on my couch with charcoal on your cheek, and I realized I was terrified. Micah said nothing. Not of Grant. Not of the money. Of you looking at me exactly the way you looked at me at my birthday. Bennett finally met his eyes. Like I was somebody you wished you had never trusted. The confession landed harder than an excuse would have. Micah understood him now. That was the problem. Bennett had not continued because Micah remained a game. He had continued because Micah had become real, and Bennett was too afraid to risk losing what had become real. You loved me, Micah said slowly, and that made you lie harder. Bennett's face went pale. Yes. There it was. The midpoint Micah had been searching for without knowing it. The last year was not fake. Bennett's tenderness had not been performance. The coffee, the portfolio nights, the quiet drives home, the way Bennett remembered every tiny thing Micah said. Those memories belonged to them, and somehow that made the betrayal worse. I almost wish you had never cared, Micah whispered. Bennett flinched. Because then I could throw everything away. But you did care. You knew me. You knew how much being chosen mattered to me. Micah's voice cracked despite his effort to steady it. And you still kept the one fact that would have let me choose for myself. Bennett stared at the table. There is no defense for that. No. Micah stood. Bennett did not reach for him. What happens now, he asked. Micah pulled on his coat. Now you stop protecting me from truths that might make me leave. Bennett nodded once. All right. And you do not contact Grant for me. You do not manage the gallery for me. You do not decide what I can handle. All right. Micah took 2 steps, then stopped. He hated the next question because he already cared about the answer. Was there ever a point when you could have taken the $50,000? Bennett looked at him. Yes. And I told Grant to donate it. He refused because he wanted the game more than he wanted his money back. Micah's throat tightened. Another piece of evidence that Bennett had stopped playing long ago. Not enough. Not nearly enough. But real. Goodbye, Bennett. Bennett's expression broke, just slightly. Goodbye, Micah. Micah walked into the rain alone. This time Bennett did not follow, did not send a car, did not even text to make sure he got home. He respected the boundary so completely that Micah discovered another cruel truth before he reached the subway. Part of him had wanted Bennett to break it. 3 days passed in silence. Then Micah received an email from Northline confirming his place in the showcase. Attached was the final guest list. Near the bottom was Grant Keller. Micah stared at the name until his pulse steadied. His first instinct was to call Bennett. He did not. Instead, he opened a new message and typed 5 words. I am going to handle this. He hesitated, then sent it. Bennett's reply came less than a minute later. I know you can. Nothing else. No warning. No rescue plan. No demand to attend. Micah read the words twice, feeling the distance between them, and, beneath it, something that had somehow survived the truth. Then another message appeared. This one was from Lauren. A major donor had requested that Bennett Rourke not attend the showcase because his presence might create more controversy. Micah looked at Bennett's quiet reply again and realized the next choice was no longer Bennett's to make. It was his. Micah waited until midnight before answering Northline. He read the donor request 3 times, each pass making him angrier for a different reason. Bennett had caused the original damage. That was true. But now people who barely knew Micah were deciding who could stand in a room with him, as if his career required permission from strangers to exist. He typed carefully. Bennett Rourke will not be involved professionally with my work, but I will decide who attends as my personal guest. Then he sent Bennett a screenshot. Bennett replied 10 minutes later. You do not have to invite me to prove anything. Micah stared at the words. 3 months ago, Bennett would have already arranged a meeting, solved the problem, and presented Micah with the finished result. Now he was doing the harder thing. Nothing. Micah typed, I know. I am inviting you because I want you to see the work. Bennett answered, then I would like to come. The simplicity of it made Micah's chest ache. The next evening, rain hammered Manhattan hard enough to turn every streetlight into a blur. Micah was leaving his shared studio with 2 framed pieces when he discovered the rideshare pickup area flooded and the subway entrance temporarily closed. He stood beneath a narrow awning, balancing 40 pounds of framed artwork while trying not to panic. A black sedan pulled to the curb. Bennett stepped out holding an umbrella. Micah immediately frowned. Did you track me? No. Bennett lifted his phone. Lauren called because the gallery courier canceled. She had my number from the legal statement. He looked at the frames, then at Micah. She asked whether I could help. I told her I would ask you first. That last sentence mattered. Micah hated that it mattered. You came all the way downtown to ask? Apparently, I am learning inefficient communication. Micah almost smiled. You can drive the paintings. Bennett nodded. Only the paintings. You can drive me too. Bennett opened the rear door and helped secure the frames with blankets he had brought from home. No assistant. No driver. No performance. 20 minutes later, traffic stopped completely. Rain drummed against the roof while Bennett loosened his tie and stared through the windshield. Micah noticed the dark circles beneath his eyes. When did you last sleep? That sounds accusatory. Bennett. 4 hours last night. Why? Bennett hesitated. My father found out I withdrew from 2 family social committees Grant belongs to. We had a conversation. Meaning he reminded me that Rourkes do not create public messes. We contain them. Micah looked at him. Suddenly Bennett's old instincts made uncomfortable sense. Fix the problem privately. Control the narrative. Never let anyone see uncertainty. Is that why you hid the bet? Partly. Bennett rubbed his thumb across the steering wheel. My entire life, mistakes were things you buried before they could embarrass the family. Feelings were worse because you could not bury them. Cleanly. He gave a humorless laugh. You were the first person who ever looked at me while I was failing at something and did not seem disappointed. Micah remembered the night Bennett had tried helping assemble a cheap bookshelf and installed one shelf backward. Micah had laughed until he cried. Bennett had laughed too. At the time it had seemed ordinary. Maybe ordinary had been the gift. You should have trusted me with the ugly part, Micah said. I know. Understanding why you lied does not make the lie smaller. I know that too. Traffic moved. Bennett drove another block before speaking again. I think I kept trying to become the version of myself you already believed I was. Micah looked out the window because that hurt in a completely different place. At the gallery loading entrance, Bennett carried the heavier frame inside, but stopped when Lauren approached. Micah decides placement, he said before she could ask him anything. Then he stepped aside. For the next hour, Micah worked while Bennett quietly held measuring tape, moved frames when asked, and said nothing when Micah rejected 3 of his suggestions. Eventually, Micah caught him staring at the blue and amber cityscape. What? Nothing. You are doing the face. What face? The one where you have an opinion and are pretending you do not. Bennett surrendered. The window in the upper right changed. Micah blinked. There were nearly 80 painted windows. You remember that? It used to be dark. Bennett pointed. Now somebody is home. Micah stared at him. Bennett had noticed. Not because the painting might become valuable. Not because a gallery cared. Because months ago, sitting on Micah's battered couch, he had actually looked. I changed it after the birthday, Micah admitted. Why? I did not want the whole building to feel abandoned. Their eyes met. Something quiet passed between them, fragile but no longer entirely broken. Later, Bennett drove Micah home. At the curb, he did not reach across the console. He simply said, "Good night, Micah." Micah opened the door, then paused. "You can come to the showcase." Bennett went still. "As my guest," Micah added. "Not my boyfriend. Not yet." Hope appeared in Bennett's face, but he handled it carefully. "Whatever you are comfortable with." Micah nodded and stepped into the rain. Bennett waited until Micah reached the building before driving away. Upstairs, Micah found an email waiting from Northline. Grant Keller had confirmed his attendance. He had also requested permission to bring several members of Bennett's former social circle. Micah looked through the window at Bennett's taillights disappearing down the street. For the first time since the birthday, his instinct was not to wonder whether Bennett would protect him. It was to wonder whether, when the room turned against them, Bennett would finally be willing to stand beside him without hiding anything. The night of the showcase, Micah arrived early enough to watch strangers stop in front of his work before they knew he was the artist. That mattered more than he expected. One man leaned closer to examine the layers of blue in the cityscape. A woman brought her husband back to see the window Micah had changed from dark to glowing amber. For 20 quiet minutes, nobody mentioned Bennett Rourke. Nobody mentioned money. Nobody mentioned the bet. They simply looked. Micah finally felt like the room belonged to his work. Then Bennett arrived. He wore a simple charcoal suit and came alone, exactly as Micah had asked. He did not approach immediately. He stood near the entrance until Micah saw him, then lifted his hand in a small question. Micah nodded. Only then did Bennett cross the room. "You came. You invited me." Bennett looked toward the crowded wall. Pride softened his face. They are staying in front of your pieces longer than anyone else's. Micah tried not to smile. You timed them. Possibly. That is deeply weird. I prefer supportive. For a few seconds, it almost felt normal. Then Grant Keller walked in with 4 men from Bennett's old circle. Micah felt Bennett notice before he turned. The change was tiny. His shoulders straightened. His expression cooled. But he did not move in front of Micah. He remembered. Stand beside me, not in front of me. Grant spent 15 minutes pretending to admire the exhibition. Then Lauren gathered the guests near Micah's wall to introduce the participating artists. Micah's name had barely left her mouth when Grant spoke. Before everyone starts congratulating him, maybe they should know what they are actually looking at. The room quieted. Grant raised his phone. A screenshot appeared on the large presentation monitor near the wall. Micah recognized the old group chat immediately. Bennett Rourke, I can get Ellison to fall for me. Grant Keller, 50,000 says you cannot keep him for a year. Then another message appeared beneath it. Bennett Rourke, watch me. A murmur moved through the gallery. Micah's stomach dropped, even though he already knew those words existed. Grant was not finished. The next image was a bank transfer from a Rourke family account dated 2 months earlier. $50,000. The recipient line displayed Micah Ellison. Someone whispered he got paid. Micah stared at the screen. That is not my account. Grant gave him a sympathetic smile that somehow felt crueler than laughter. Of course. A donor near Lauren frowned. Was this entire scandal publicity? Another voice asked whether Micah's gallery opportunity had been part of some settlement. Micah could feel the room changing around him. 10 minutes earlier, they had been discussing his brushwork. Now people were looking at him like a transaction. The account is not mine, Micah said again louder. I have never received $50,000 from Bennett. Grant shrugged. Then I am sure Bennett can explain where it went. Every face turned toward him. Bennett had gone completely still. Micah looked at him. Bennett. For one awful second, Bennett said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the transfer, not with guilt, but concentration. He took out his phone and enlarged something on the screen. Bennett, Micah repeated. The silence stretched. Micah knew Bennett was thinking. He knew that look. Bennett never spoke when he was not certain. But the room did not know that. The room only saw the wealthy man refusing to answer whether his struggling former boyfriend had received $50,000. Grant smiled. Interesting. Micah's chest tightened. Say something. Bennett finally looked at him. Give me 1 minute. Wrong answer. Completely, devastatingly wrong. I gave you 9 months, Micah whispered. Bennett's face changed. Micah, that is not what this is. Then tell them. I will. But I need to verify one thing first. Grant laughed, always managing the narrative. Bennett ignored him and made a call, stepping several feet away. Micah heard only fragments. Account number. Transfer authorization. Original record. Each second felt longer than the last. Lauren quietly turned off the presentation monitor, but the damage had already moved from screen to faces. A man near Micah's cityscape stepped away from it. That tiny movement hurt more than Grant's accusation. Micah had spent years becoming good enough to stand in this room. One screenshot had reduced him back to Bennett Rourke's boyfriend. Worse, it had reduced him to someone who might have sold his humiliation for exactly the amount Bennett once stood to win. I did not take his money, Micah said. Nobody answered quickly enough. That was the low point. Not Grant's smile. Not the whispers. The hesitation. Micah looked toward Bennett. He was still on the phone. Still investigating. Still not standing beside him. Micah knew there might be a reason. He knew Bennett had changed. He knew trust was supposed to be rebuilt slowly. But humiliation did not care about logic. It remembered the birthday hallway. It remembered laughter behind a door. It remembered learning that the person Micah trusted most had once decided what truths he could survive. Micah walked toward the exit. Bennett saw him immediately. Micah. Micah kept moving. Bennett ended the call. Please wait. Micah stopped at the door, but did not turn around. I asked you for one thing, he said. No more silence when the truth gets ugly. I know. Bennett's voice was closer now. And I have the truth. Micah closed his eyes. Behind them, Grant said loudly. Then by all means, Rourke. Tell everyone. The gallery went silent again. Micah finally turned. Bennett stood in the center of the room with his phone in one hand and something unfamiliar in his expression. Not fear. Decision. Grant was still smiling. But Bennett was no longer looking at him. He was looking only at Micah. You were right, Bennett said quietly. I should have spoken before I had every detail. He took one step toward the crowd. So, I am going to do something I should have done a year ago. I am going to tell the truth while it can still cost me something. Bennett turned his phone so Lauren could see the screen first. The transfer is real, he said. Grant's smile sharpened. Micah felt the room lean toward the accusation. Then Bennett continued. The recipient is not Micah. He connected his phone to the gallery display, and the bank record appeared behind him. This time the full document was visible instead of Grant's cropped screenshot. The recipient field did contain Micah Ellison, but beneath it was an account number ending in 4182. Bennett opened a second document. When Grant threatened to expose the wager 9 months ago, I tried to end it. 3 months ago, I instructed my family's financial office to send the $50,000 to a nonprofit art scholarship under Micah's name. I did not tell Micah because I did not want credit for it. Grant folded his arms. Convenient story. It would be, Bennett said, if you had not supplied the evidence yourself. He enlarged the transfer authorization. The destination account belonged to the Manhattan Emerging Artists Fund. The confirmation date matched the screenshot exactly. Lauren stepped closer. So Mr. Ellison never received this. Not $1. Bennett opened another email. And Northline was not a recipient either. The scholarship is administered independently. Grant's expression finally shifted. Bennett looked at him with a calmness that was somehow harsher than anger. You cropped the account owner from the screenshot, left Micah's name visible in the dedication field, and presented it as payment. One of Grant's friends quietly lowered his drink. That is not what I said, Grant replied. You did not need to say it. Micah spoke before Bennett could. Every face turned toward him. His heart was pounding, but he was done letting other people narrate his life. You put incomplete information in front of a room and waited for everyone to reach the ugliest conclusion. Grant gave a dismissive shrug. If your relationship was not so messy, there would be nothing to misunderstand. No, Micah said. Bennett made a terrible choice. He lied to me. I am still angry about it. But none of that makes my work yours to humiliate. The words came easier after that. Micah pointed toward the paintings. I made those before anyone here knew about the bet. Northline has the submission dates. Lauren has the review scores. If somebody dislikes my work, they are welcome to dislike it. But they do not get to pretend Bennett painted it for me. Silence followed. Then Lauren stepped beside Micah. For clarity, Northline selected Mr. Ellison's portfolio before receiving any communication from Mr. Rourke. Another donor nodded. I reviewed it myself. Grant looked toward Bennett. You are really going to destroy friendships over this? Bennett disconnected his phone from the display. No, I am ending friendships because I finally understand what they required me to become. Grant scoffed. You started the bet too. Yes. Bennett did not hesitate. I did. The room went still again. Micah looked at him. Bennett could have hidden behind Grant's manipulation. Instead, he stepped directly into his own guilt. I approached Micah because I wanted to win, Bennett said. That is the truth. I thought being able to charm someone who did not care about my name would prove something about me. His voice remained steady, but his hand tightened around his phone. Then I learned who he was. Bennett looked toward Micah's cityscape. He notices people everyone else overlooks. He works until his hands cramp and still thinks talent is something he has to apologize for. He remembers the names of servers. He gives away time he cannot afford. He made me understand that being admired by a room is not the same as being known by one person. Micah's throat tightened. Bennett looked directly at him. I loved him. Then I became afraid that telling the truth would make him leave, so I took away his right to choose. That was not protection. It was cowardice. Nobody laughed now. Bennett reached into his coat and placed a folded document on the nearest table. This morning, I formally withdrew from the Rourke Social Foundation Committee. Grant's face changed. That committee was where their circle traded invitations, influence, and introductions. Bennett continued. I also instructed our family office that I will not participate in any private club, investment group, or event where Grant Keller represents my interests or uses my name. Your father approved that? Grant asked. No. Bennett's answer was almost peaceful. That is why it costs something. Micah stared at him. This was not Bennett winning. This was Bennett choosing something he could not control afterward. Grant looked around for support and found none. One of the men who had arrived with him quietly said, You showed us a cropped bank record. Another stepped away. Lauren approached Grant. You used our event to make a knowingly misleading accusation against one of our artists. I am asking you to leave. Grant's reputation did not collapse because Bennett commanded it. It cracked because everyone had just watched him manipulate evidence with his own hands. Grant left without another joke. The room remained awkward for several seconds. Then the woman who had admired Micah's cityscape earlier walked back to it. "You said every window has a story?" she asked. Micah blinked. "Yes. Tell me about this one." She pointed to the glowing window in the upper right. Micah looked at Bennett. Bennett did not answer for him. He simply stepped back into the crowd and listened. So Micah explained the painting. Other people gathered. Questions followed about color, loneliness, home, and why one window had changed. 10 minutes later, Lauren placed a small red dot beneath the cityscape. "Sold." Micah stared at it. Bennett was standing 20 feet away, smiling like the achievement belonged entirely to Micah. Because it did. Later, when the gallery had begun emptying, Bennett approached only after Micah nodded. "You did not need me tonight," Bennett said. Micah looked at the red dot beneath his painting. "No." Bennett lowered his gaze. "I know." Micah stepped closer. "But I wanted you here." Bennett looked up. That distinction seemed to hit him harder than forgiveness could have. Micah was not ready to erase the birthday. He was not ready to pretend trust repaired itself because Bennett finally did the right thing publicly. But for the first time, he could imagine something beyond betrayal. "Stay," Micah said. Bennett's breath caught. "For what?" Micah glanced around at the remaining paintings. "You have only seen half the show." Bennett smiled, small and private, the smile Micah once thought belonged only to him. This time Micah knew exactly what was real about it. And when they walked toward the next painting, they did not touch. Not yet. But Bennett walked beside him, not ahead of him, and Micah did not ask him to move away. 3 months later, Micah stood in the center of Northline Gallery with $32 left in his checking account and a sold-out wall of his own work. The number made him laugh when he noticed it. His finances were still imperfect. His apartment was still small. His laptop still made a noise that suggested imminent death whenever he opened too many files. But none of those things made him feel invisible anymore. Tonight was his first solo exhibition, and people had come because his name was printed above the door. Bennett arrived 15 minutes after opening with no entourage, no expensive gift, and no attempt to become part of the event. He had learned. Over the last 3 months, learning had become something Micah could measure. Bennett asked before helping. He stopped trying to solve problems Micah had not given him. When Micah needed space, Bennett gave it without disappearing. When Micah wanted company, Bennett showed up with coffee and stayed until Micah sent him home. They had eaten dinner together 6 times, walked through Central Park twice, argued once about Bennett's terrible habit of answering work emails during movies. They had not called themselves boyfriends again. Bennett never asked when that would change. Trust returned in smaller units than love had arrived the first time. Maybe that was why Micah believed it. Near the end of the evening, Bennett stopped in front of the largest painting in the room. It showed a hallway divided by a half-open door. On one side, shadows gathered around abandoned champagne glasses. On the other, warm light spilled into an empty space waiting to be entered. Bennett stared at it for a long time. "I know that door," he said when Micah joined him. "I figured you would. You painted my birthday." "Not exactly." Bennett looked at him. Micah pointed toward the light. "I painted what came after." Bennett's expression softened. "That seems generous." "It is not about generosity." Micah slipped his hands into his pockets. "For a while, I thought the worst thing you did was make me feel stupid for loving you." Bennett said nothing. He had gotten better at silence too. Not the silence that concealed, but the kind that made room. "Then I realized that was not what hurt most," Micah continued. "What hurt was believing everybody else had gotten to decide what my love meant before I did." Bennett's eyes lowered. "I am sorry. I know." Micah meant it differently now. He knew Bennett was sorry because Bennett had lived differently. The apology was no longer evidence. It was only the name for what the evidence had already proven. Across the gallery, Lauren announced that the final piece had sold. Applause rose. Micah turned instinctively toward the sound and saw strangers standing beneath his name. Nobody was whispering about Bennett. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was calculating what Micah was worth to somebody else. Bennett stepped away. "Go," he said. "This is yours." 3 months ago, Bennett would have taken Micah's hand and led him toward the crowd. Tonight he understood that Micah did not need leading. Micah took 2 steps, then stopped. He looked back at the man who had once entered his life because $50,000 said he could win Micah's heart. Bennett had lost the bet. He had lost friends. He had damaged his standing with his family. More importantly, he had surrendered the belief that loving Micah gave him the right to control what happened next. Micah walked back. Bennett looked confused. What happened? Nothing. Then why are you looking at me like that? Micah smiled. Because you are still terrible at waiting. I have become exceptionally good at waiting. You checked your watch 4 times during my conversation with Lauren. That was professional timekeeping. Micah laughed, and Bennett's face changed at the sound. There it was again. That private smile. Except now Micah did not need to wonder whether it was part of a performance. He reached for Bennett's hand. Bennett froze. Around them, people were still talking. Lauren was watching from across the room. Bennett glanced at their joined hands, and then at Micah. Are you sure? That question was the reason Micah knew he was. Yes. Bennett's fingers closed carefully around his. Micah remembered another night, another expensive room, another crowd waiting for him to say 3 particular words so somebody could win. Back then, his love had been turned into a finish line without his knowledge. Tonight there was no countdown, no money, no condition, nobody waiting behind a door to laugh. Micah stepped closer. I love you. Bennett stopped breathing. Micah almost smiled. You heard me. I did. Bennett's voice was unsteady. I just want to make sure you know you do not owe me that. I know. You do not have to forgive everything. I know. And if this is because of what happened at the showcase, Bennett. He stopped. Micah squeezed his hand. This is my choice. Bennett's eyes shone, but he did not turn the moment into a speech. He simply nodded, once, like Micah had given him something too important to handle carelessly. Then I love you too. Micah looked toward the painting of the open door. On Bennett's birthday, he had stood outside a room holding a gift he thought proved how much he loved someone, only to discover that other people had put a price on his heart. Tonight he stood inside a room built from his own talent, beneath his own name, holding the hand of a man who finally understood that love was not something to win. Bennett leaned slightly closer. Can I kiss you? Micah smiled. You can. The kiss was brief and gentle, followed by Bennett resting his forehead against Micah's for one quiet second before the gallery applause pulled them back into the room. This time Micah did not feel like the poor outsider standing beside the popular rich man. He was Micah Ellison, an artist whose work covered the walls, a man who had survived humiliation without surrendering his capacity to trust, and someone who finally understood that being chosen meant very little until he learned he was allowed to choose back. He took Bennett's hand and walked toward the waiting crowd, leaving the painted door behind them open.